Good evening, everyone. Here we are with our second week now of talking about overcoming fearfulness. If you remember last week, I spoke quite a bit about the fact that it might not have sounded exactly like this to everyone, but the essence of it was that probably every fear that we have can be traced back to the ego's longing to hold on to us. Its incredible hold that it has on us, and that unwillingness to let go. And the fear comes from the ego holding, let me just see if I can say this. Let me just think for a moment and put it in a way that is perfectly clear. The fear is the ego speaking to us of its own fear of losing control, and in fact, of the soul winning. That is, that we would pay attention to our soul's aspirations and not be paying attention to all of the ways that the ego likes to hold on. I'm afraid I won't give a good enough talk. I'm afraid nobody will ever love me. I'm afraid they're angry with me. I'm afraid I won't be successful in my work and I'll look foolish. And this is all from an egoic point of view. And it is, unfortunately, still where most of us live from. And the fear comes from that ego with always the soul's longing, this extraordinary, and it is, magnetic energy for the soul to return to what we call its home in God, but what it really means is into its natural state of oneness with all that is, its natural state of super consciousness, its natural states of total peace, of calmness, of courage, of willingness, of all of these spiritual qualities that have us feel uplifted and expansive, and knowing in each of the moments that the ego wants to hold us back, that at any time, if the soul wins, we could say, as Swamiji puts, I always forget the name of the song, but one of his songs in the, my goodness, this is terrible. I just listened to it about 30 times in seclusion, but the oratorio, I'm sorry, in the oratorio where Jesus comes up and he says, "Get thee behind me." And he's speaking to Satan and the people, the souls that Satan's speaking to. Satan's saying, I can give you everything you want. I can give you riches. I can give you relationships. I can give you a sense of power. I can fulfill all of your needs. And Jesus comes in and says, Jesus meaning, well, it's Jesus, but God himself saying, those are not the things that are going to make you happy. And he says, get thee behind me. Jesus did say, Satan, know you not. Our Father offers love in your stead. So Jesus is saying, let go of this satanic pull, and it takes a lot of power and a lot of will and a lot of courage, all of these things that we always talk about. But the fear is always there, coming from the ego, feeding us. Wrong path, wrong path, wrong path. You can't do it, you're not good enough. Or, are you going to leave me, Satan says, for that, for divine love? And although I took you last week on a path of, let me just check my clock here, sorry, 3 o'clock, okay. I forgot to look at when I started, but that's okay. How I spoke a lot about defense mechanisms, because every defense mechanism, all of the ways that we feel fear, all of the ways that we go into denial, anything that's ever listed as a way of defending ourselves. And denial is one of those ways. We'll just deny there's a problem. We lose consciousness about things that happen to us, that hurt us, and we don't think of them as if we can push them. It's really out of mind, out of sight, out of mind, but it's not out of sight, out of self. It's not out of sight, out of soul. They're still there, and they still have a hold on us, those things that we are denying. And so we react to them anyway, and we react to them in all of these various ways: fear, greed, anger, jealousy. I'm just kind of recapping where we were. But they all have their base in fear. From the psychological perspective, usually a fear of failure, a fear of not being good enough, a fear of not being lovable enough, big ones, and ultimately a fear of death, which keeps driving us. But there's no resolution in that. That's all of the mind and of the psyche. And what Swamiji and Master want us to look at with fearfulness is that we need to lift ourselves and our entire self up out of it. I just wanted to refer to a few things, not really read anything. But Master himself says, remember I was referring last week to having gone back to some of his earliest writings about nervousness, and he says very clearly, he says, nervousness appears to be a simple ailment. Well, if you're nervous, you actually don't think it's very simple. But he says it appears to be. But it's not. It's got a huge price tag on it. And he goes on, and I wanted to go through his whole list. It makes us, this is not his list now, this is still me just speaking generally, but it makes us so uncomfortable within ourselves. It grabs all of our attention. We can't attend to those soul qualities. We can't get back to calmness, centeredness, so we can't make good decisions. We can't notice intuitive answers coming through. It undermines all of our decision-making ability. So it affects our relationships. It affects our business ventures. Nervousness is highly intrusive in life. And in fact, I would say that it completely, choosing my words carefully now, undermines, if not completely inhibits, our ability to succeed in any way, even in worldly ways. I just said that. When you're anxious, you're not making very good decisions. You make bad business decisions, you make bad relationship decisions. There's a lot more about it, and I'm going to go through a few points before we come back to tonight, sort of like, what do we do about it? It's such a huge part of, it's not even just a huge part of the human condition. That doesn't say it. It's at the core of the human condition. And as I just keep repeating these same things psychologically because of what we're really afraid of, and spiritually because it represents the battle of the ego and the soul. So overcoming fearfulness really means walking our spiritual path. It actually is the whole of our path in a way that, as I said last week, many of the emotions that I talked about before, we could always, everything will wind its way back to ego reality versus soul reality. Everything will, because there's nothing else going on in life, really. We get sort of, enamored with this or sidetracked with this or brought down with another situation. But the truth is, in the end, whether it's depression, whether it's anxiety, whether it's doubt, whether it's dull-mindedness, whatever all of the other things that all of the other emotions that we've gone through, yeah, in the end, we can bring them back to the same truth. But fearfulness is, I think, it's not that it's much more obvious, it's that all of those things culminate, each of them, in a state of fearfulness. So if we can pick it up by this thread, if we can notice when we are afraid and act on it, we can win the battle without looking at every other detail and every other thread underneath. I wanted to just run through, and I'll refer to some notes about this, a list of some of the ways that Master Yogananda spoke about fearfulness. The first he said is that, and this is very interesting, he said fearfulness exaggerates every one of our miseries, these are his words, 1,000-fold. And I think that's what I was just saying. If we can look at a state of fearfulness and lift ourselves up, all of the other miseries, depression, anxiety, lack of courage, everything would dissipate. If we cut it off at that place, no, I'm not going to be afraid, because obviously the opposite state of fearfulness, or at least one of the opposites of it, or neutralizing qualities that we could bring in, is courage. And once we feel courageous, difficult, yes, but once we feel courageous, we can just do anything, really anything. Last night was Swami Kriyananda's birthday celebration. It was a very powerful program. Many people spoke, and they spoke beautifully, and there was music, and there was a pictorial of Swamiji's life that went on for 10 minutes, and it was a lovely program. And I wound up giving a very short talk, and because, well, it doesn't matter why. There was something that I wanted to say that I didn't say, and it fits in here right now, and that is that, and it's relevant, of course, is that there's a woman who wrote an article for our LA ashram. All of the colonies around were writing articles about Swamiji's birthday. And so I was getting them all. They were wonderful. Everybody picked up a different thread of Swamiji, about Swamiji, the ways that he was saintly, just saintly, there's no other word for it, or a saint. But Kalamali, who wrote the article for Los Angeles, said very interestingly, she said, everything we need to know about Swami Kriyananda came to us in the very last word of his life, the last word he ever spoke, and that was anything. Now, the situation was that his nurse saw that he didn't look well and said, do you mind if I check your blood sugar? And he, in a very inward way, I mean, he was a moment away from leaving his body. I'm sure he was already leaving his body. He just said anything. And what Kalamali spoke to, now I don't remember her words, so I'll use my own words, but what it means to be able to say anything, how much willingness, how much courage, how much power we need to bring to that quality in our lives, anything that will take me closer to God. And courage being a big part of that you can't possibly say anything and mean it if you don't have at your core courage. Because when we are courageous, fearfulness cannot win the battle. It's not that we can't be doing something courageous and feel a little fear. I've felt it many times in my life, taking off on some of the great travel adventures is the one that comes to mind right away. Big, long backpacking trips or treks or things where there's a part of me saying, am I up to this, really? And until you get your walking legs, it's sort of called, until you've walked maybe a half a mile with your backpack on, there's always that, yikes, what did I get myself into? So there's that little bit of fear, but it's not the fearfulness that overtakes you. You're still walking, you're still going. You have the courage to do it. So if this is what Master's saying here when he says, it aggravates your miseries 1,000-fold. That's an important thing to remember. It doesn't help us get on top of it, but it helps us say to ourselves, boy, I really want to work on this. I really want to begin to notice when I'm feeling fearful, or if I'm angry, if I'm behaving as if I'm angry, what am I really afraid of? Because in every way, as you'll see over these next minutes, it undermines our ability to make good anywhere or aggravates our miseries 1,000-fold. I love how Master said that. The next thing he said is that fear contaminates vivid imagination emotions, influencing the subconscious to such an extent that it, in turn, completely destroys the willing efforts of consciousness. Isn't that amazing? That it is such a contaminant. It gets so into our levels of consciousness, and even if it's functioning at the unconscious level, that it contaminates, undermines, lessens the ability of all of what would be going on in our other states of consciousness. You'll see that every one of these come back to how pervasive is the influence of fearfulness. And, you know, even as I'm speaking, it's hitting me like, wow, this is really huge. I have to be diligent about opening my heart, practicing my meditation. I'm saying this to myself right now, so I'm just choosing to say it out loud to you. I can't afford to be afraid, because those things that are affecting our unconscious thoughts, we're not aware. That's why we call it unconscious. So if fear is getting down that deep, it's just affecting all of who we are all the time. We must rid ourselves of it. We can't be complacent about this. This is what's coming up for me right now. This is very interesting. Master says, fear develops, I'm just trying to use his word, in an individual, a malignant magnetism by which it attracts the very object that one is afraid of. So it has its own magnetism, and it will draw to us the very thing that we think we're afraid of. I won't give a good talk. I won't give a good talk. I can't give a good talk. I don't know how to give a good talk. You know, you pretty much stand up and give a very bad talk. I've watched people talk themselves into these things, and it is mostly by the magnetism that this state of fearfulness has on us. And interestingly, it is a big part of how people who live a fear-based life justify their points of view. When they want to make an argument, I can't, we won't be able to, you'll see, it won't work, they are already setting up the situation to go exactly, it's like a prediction. Sorry, there was a cross between predicament and prediction, but I knew it was wrong. It's a prediction. That's what it is. And it's the fear that's driving it, because fear has its own magnetism. Now, every emotional state does. That's part of how emotions get us into trouble. But I think what is clear through Master, and I'm saying it over and over, is that fearfulness is particularly big in some of these ways. So you get afraid, the very thing you're afraid of comes to you, and then we say, see, I knew it. But if we had been able to nip that fear in the bud, that would not have happened. The very thing that we were afraid of. And if ever you can practice that and try it, I think you'll see that it's true. I've done the experiment. I can't always do the experiment. I don't always think of it when I'm afraid, and I can't always overpower the power of fearfulness, but I have been able to at times, and it works. Uncontrolled fear, Master says, destroys business initiative. He says it paralyzes the desire to repeat success-producing efforts. Isn't that interesting? This, from the words of an avatar, is that the very state of fearfulness paralyzes that part of you that would like to succeed, all of the effort that would go into succeeding. Therefore, one cannot. And he says here, fear inhibits the almighty power of the soul. That's a powerful phrase. It's part of that same destroys business initiatives. But I bolded it and put it in red because, again, they're words of Yogananda's. Fear inhibits the almighty power of the soul. That is saying quite a bit. This is what would help us find the incentive to keep moving forward on our paths, to not let fear hold us back. Last week, I spoke to you of a couple of stories. One was of the daughter-in-law of a friend of mine whose son just died suddenly at a young age. Remember, I said the daughter-in-law would not let her two children out of her sight. But what's closer to me, and I know more about, was the story I told you about my daughter-in-law. I had been living with them. I left, her fear kicked in, and she would not let me in. She wouldn't let me down. I could have helped. I could have helped her through her fear, first of all, which would have been a gift that, well, obviously she couldn't even imagine it. I mean, never mind to say not invited. She kept me out. But even my going into that house with our consciousness would have provided a calming effect. But it was impossible because fear inhibits the almighty power of the soul. I tried to talk, kind of reason with her. I tried to offer her love. No way. It was powerful. I said this to you last week. It blindsided me. And as I got off the phone, and I had to work through it at first, just because it felt so wrong to me, and I felt so much like I could bring some good there, and it felt like such immediate and intense rejection. It just took a while to kind of make sense of it. But as I was trying to make sense of it, I realized, wow, it's just like pulling down a black curtain on a sunny day. Nobody in the world, if you are only in that room, can convince you that the sun is shining brightly outside. You are in a dark room. That's your reality. That's what fear does. Master says, have fear of nothing but fear itself. It's a very interesting little phrase. There's nothing else to be afraid of. There's nothing to be afraid of because, as I said last week, we are made in God's image. We are, every one of us. We are made from God. Made in his image doesn't even say it. He manifested us right out of his consciousness. There's nothing in this world that we have to be afraid of. There's not going to be any thing that comes our way, any problem, any roadblock, any hardship, challenge that we can't overcome? Nothing. It's impossible because of who we are at a soul level. So it's only when fear comes in. So Yogananda says, fear only, fear itself. Then he tells us fear has a deleterious effect on the heart, on the nervous system, and on the brain, that it's destructive to mental initiative, which he already talked about when he was talking about business, to courage. It affects people's judgment. It affects their common sense, and it has a terrible negating effect on will. But a lot of that is what happens even through a physiologic component. We all know about the fight or flight. I mean, that happens when we're suddenly faced with something. But fear itself stimulates our adrenal glands, and we can't think straight then. Any time that I've been in an intense situation, or when I practice, I think many of you have heard me say this. I know to many people it sounds morbid, but there are certain situations in my life that I do practice run-throughs all the time. One of them is an earthquake, and I practice. I have 2 different homes that I live out of, plus the temple. I practice what I will do if an earthquake comes in all of the 3 different places, because otherwise I feel like that fear could come in and get me. And I'm always practicing what I will do if somebody has a cardiac arrest in front of me on the streets. Most of the time I practice what I'll do if we're in the middle of a big Sunday service and I hear somebody say, "Where's Shanti?" Because almost inevitably when that comes out of the blue or in the middle of somebody else's sermon, it's about a medical emergency. And what I'm practicing is that take a deep breath, calm yourself, use energy as a means of calming yourself. Stay calm, stay centered, raise your energy to the point between the eyebrows, and ask the people around you to begin chanting Om. That's what I tell myself all the time. Because if I'm in a state of calm, then I'm going to be able to behave well, act well, make good decisions, help other people around me stay calm, which is very often important. If I'm really nervous, anxious, freaked out in some of these situations, everybody will be. I've discovered this. I've been around a lot of medical emergencies. I don't know why. People passing out on planes, car accidents, people just dropping right in front of me in the street. I don't know why it happens, but way more than the average person. And the thing that I found most is that I often do the most good by staying calm and beginning to give direction to people. Can you help me with this? Will you do that? Somebody call 911, talk to the pilot when it's on a plane. It just happens. So keeping ourselves calm, this is what Master's referring to here. Then he says, and this is, of all the things we've said, this really feels so most important to me. Fear throws a veil over intuition and robs you of your confidence to master your difficulties. Throws a veil over your intuition. Intuition is exactly how we want to be moving through everything in our lives, everything, all the time. So if we can't tune in to our intuitive process, faculties, if we can't get that, it's all ego. Everything we're doing is based on ego, and a disturbed state of egoism at that. Fear-driven. Everything else Master just said. It's the worst possible scenario. We cannot hear with those internal ears when we're afraid. They are mutually exclusive. Calming ourselves with breath, using the breath as a way to control prana, energy, is the best tool we have to combat fear. It's the best tool. Fear is illogical, irrational. We have to bring in something that is beyond mind. We can't combat anything from a place of logic that's, first of all, illogical. But we cannot use the ego, which the mind is, to solve an egoic problem. It doesn't work. You cannot solve a problem on the level on which it was created. You have to bring in higher, superconscious, intuitive energy. And then Master writes, kill fear, and he puts, big letters even. He put big, bold letters by refusing to be afraid of it. And that's really something wonderful for all of us to remember. Kill fear by refusing to be afraid of it. You would think it would be impossible. You'd say, I don't want to be afraid. I don't want to be afraid. How can I just decide not to be afraid? But that's not true. One of the things, and I can't remember whether I touched on this last week or not, it doesn't matter. We are way more hooked on some of our disabilities than we know. Way more. We always think we want to feel better. This is what we would tell ourselves. We want to be well. We don't want to be afraid. We don't want to be anxious. We don't want to be depressed. On and on and on. But the truth is, there's a little way that we get used to it is one thing, I would say. But beyond that, well, it has its own power of magnetism. So it draws us. It's a little bit of an addiction. So to find the strength to be able to say, I refuse to enter into a state of fear. I refuse. It's a good beginning. Doesn't always work because we are who we are, but it works better than not doing it, that's for sure. Having an awareness of all of these aspects that we're talking about is way better than walking through the world in a totally unconscious way. And particularly for us, because we are people who know how to open to spiritual, soulful, upward-lifting, light-laden energy. We know how to turn towards the light. We don't always do it, but we know how to. We at least know we want to. We'd much rather be turning towards the light than the dark. And all of that works in our favor. So, very few of us are going to wake up in a moment and find ourselves free of all egoic hold. Very few of us, very, very few, if any, are going to wake up and find ourselves in a state of samadhi. How do we get there? We get there by bringing in all of these awarenesses, all of these practices, one by one by one. And we just practice them a little bit until we become them. This is something else I was saying last night in this just very short little talk that I gave. But I was, again, speaking about Swami Kriyananda, and I was talking about how many uplifting qualities and characteristics he has. And I was saying that I looked in the index of Asha's book, Light Bearer, because she kept telling me that the woman who did the indexing was so meticulous, and she said it's incredibly well indexed, meaning it would be very easy to find the subject that you're looking for in the book, and which is great, of course. So I just looked up characteristics in the index, and there were all of these uplifting qualities of Swamiji's, all of them, about his power, about his compassion, about his heart, about his generosity, empathy. It went on and on. His sense of humor, his willingness to be firm when he needed to be firm, just listed them. And then I said, and it's no joke, it's true. You know how in Index it said, see also bliss, see also ahimsa, nonviolence, see also, I don't remember what else, so many of his qualities. And I said to everybody, we're not going to wake up and be Swamiji tomorrow. He was a true saint. I see that now. He was a saint. He came into so many of our lives and completely changed our lives. He touched our hearts, he changed our minds, but even for those of us who might have been a little more resistant, he showed us what it meant to walk on a spiritual path, exactly how to do it under almost every circumstance, and with total loving compassion and patience. So I said, choose a quality. And for a week, try and practice that quality that was in Swamiji. And then, though, will we become Swamiji in this lifetime? I don't know. Maybe a lot of you could, maybe. But we're walking this path, and we're getting closer and closer to being more like him, then more Swami-like. Then we might get to that place in this life, or some life in the immediate future rather than tens of thousands away, be able to say, boy, I've practiced all these qualities and tuning into Swamiji so much, I can't feel where he ends and I begin. Just like he said about Master. We will get there. We will. We have to. We're on the path. So why not just start trying now? And that's how we move through these emotions that have a hold on us. That's how we move through this state of fearfulness. And even this, I just picked up a quote of Master's because I told myself there's a few things I wanted to end with. And Master said, remember, God is with you. The more you meditate and try to contact him, the more often you will feel him with you. Fear is an unnecessary emotion. He says that. Such an extraordinary thing. You must not be afraid of anything. So, honestly, I didn't just remember it right now. I highlighted that last week as one of the comments, one of his comments that I wanted to end with. But it's really what I was just talking about. When he says, remember, God is with you. The more you meditate and try to contact him, the more often you'll feel him. That's what we have to do. So really find a quality of Swamiji's. Look them up in the Index, or see what drew you to him or to Master, a quality. In Swamiji's book, The Biography of Yogananda, there's a whole chapter on salient characteristics of Yogananda. Pick one of them. Great sense of humor, compassion, I mean, whatever. I don't remember, there's 28 or 38, or I forget how many in that book. Pick any one of these things. Make it a habit that you do every week, every Sunday or Monday, or Wednesday for that matter, or Friday night after this talk. You find another quality and just put it around. Put it up on your refrigerator, put it on your desktop, on your computer, put a little note on your phone, wherever you go all the time, in your kitchen. Oh, compassion, yes, of course. I want to be more compassionate and think of a situation where you could be. It's just one step at a time. It's how we're all going. We're putting one foot in front of another on the spiritual path. And for any of you who have ever hiked to the top of a mountain, you know that's just what it is. It's one foot in front of the other. And then all of a sudden, you've made it to the top of the mountain. You're amazed a lot of the time. That's what we're doing. That's exactly what we're doing. I wanted to end tonight by, let me just find it. So I wanted to end with two things. First, I wanted to end with this. The part of our festival that we do every week was so relevant that I couldn't help but want to repeat it. There's some lines in there, and they're so poignant. They're particularly poignant after we've been listening to the notion of fearfulness for 2 weeks. But then, and this is, we're talking about the little bird who goes on this journey. First he runs away from his home and God, then he comes back. Of course, the little bird is all of us. That's what the bird is. And Swamiji used him as a way to show us what happens. We leave home, we rebel, we revolt, then we start wondering, well, should I start turning around and making this quest to go home? And then, of course, the redemption. And that's our soul's journey. But at some point in there, says, we now, like that little bird, have come to realize that buffeting winds are life's way of giving us strength and courage. So buffeting winds that have been blowing this little bird all around, and he felt so out of control. They're life's way of giving us strength and courage, that even fear, like shadows on a statue, gives light and substance to hope. That's so beautiful. And even that analogy, that image, I don't know if there's another word for it, I might be blocking, like shadows on a statue, which give a depth to the statue. It brings it alive. You know that. It gives it a depth. That even fear, like shadows on a statue, gives light and substance to hope. It's so beautiful. So he's saying fear isn't something to run away from. Transform it. Let it be the very thing, the energy that you use to see life differently. No, I'm not going to be afraid. Let me draw that energy up and use it to face life unafraid. Now, I do want to end. Just give me a moment till I find it. Here it is, right here. This is the prayer at the end of the affirmation for courage that's in Swamiji's book, Affirmation for Self-Healing, that we read from every Sunday. And the thought that behind it is that we will take that quality, that spiritual quality, so in this instance it would be courage, and we would say this affirmation over and over throughout the week. Not a bad thing to do. I bet there are very few of us that actually do it. I'm not going to read the affirmation, but I'll end the talk this way with this, the prayer that goes with it. And then we'll come back at the end of this talk. I'd like to answer a question that Evelyn posed last week, and I'll answer it. And then we'll see if there are any other questions. But just in terms of bringing this topic to a close right now, let's just listen to the words of this prayer that Swamiji wrote for the affirmation for courage. I look to thee for my strength, Lord. Hold me closely in thy arms of love. Then, whatever happens in my life, I shall accept with joy. Isn't that beautiful? Saying, whatever happens, when I can feel you, I will then remember that whatever you bring to me is for my own highest good, and I'll accept it with joy. I look to thee for my strength, Lord. Hold me closely in thy arms of love. Then, whatever happens in my life, I shall accept with joy.